Okay, hello, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be covering another of my favorite Emory Tate chess games. You guys seem to love the last one, so I'm going to take you through another of his most dominant and beautiful performances across his chess career. But first, as always, a bit of context. This game was played in 2001 in the New Jersey Open. Emory Tate had the black pieces, that is why the board is this way around today, and the man with the white pieces goes by the name of Nick de Firmian. It's important to note that de Firmian was a three-time US chess champion, winning the tournament in 1987, 1995, and 1998, and tying for first in 2002. I tell you this to demonstrate that at the time of this game, he was one of, if not the best players in America. And I want you guys to bear that in mind while you watch Emory Tate destroy him with the black pieces. So let's get into the game. De Firmian opens with e4 and Tate replies with the Sicilian defense, immediately making that statement that, black's fighting for a win. Knight to f3 here from de Firmian, an open Sicilian, and Tate responds with d6, one of the more modern variations. d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, and knight to c3 are played, developing the knights and reaching a position that has been reached 150,000 times in the master database on Lichess. Now, 102,000 out of those 150,000 times, black has taken the opportunity to play a6, the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian. Now, the Najdorf tends to continue with bishop to e3, e5, knight b3, bishop e6. This is one of the examples of the many lines. There have been 20,000 master games in this position alone, and we are 7 moves into the game. However, Tate does not want to play this highly theoretical positional chess. Let's take it back. He did not play a6. In this position, he chose a sideline that only 0.8% of masters have played. That move is bishop to d7, the Kuprajcik variation, named after Belarusian Grandmaster Viktor Kuprajcik. De Firmian responds with bishop to e3, and this is already the point where many of you that are familiar with chess will raise some eyebrows at Tate's next move. He plays knight to g4. Now, it's a well-known opening principle in chess that you don't really want to move the same piece twice for no reason. And so, a much more natural move might have been knight to c6. You want to develop all your pieces before doing anything extravagant. The idea behind knight g4, however, justifies moving the knight twice, and it's very interesting. It puts pressure immediately on that dark squared bishop. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, that's a quite trivial threat. I mean, a bishop for a knight, that's roughly equal, 3 pawns each. How is that really a problem? Can't de Firmian just carry on with something like queen d2? Well, if de Firmian allows the trade of the dark squared bishop, then we would see something like knight takes, queen takes, and after knight c6, knight b3, g6. And the idea behind g6 is that after white castles queenside, for instance, we would see bishop to g7, and this bishop is an unassailable monster on the g7 square. Fianchettoed, applying lovely pressure down this diagonal. In an open game, this bishop is going to just sit there and dominate so much of the board, along with the knight. I mean, white has no hope of making real claims to the e5 square, for instance, especially with this pawn. The bishop, you just don't want to give a bishop pair for free, especially at this high level of chess. So instead of a move like queen d2 giving up that bishop pair, knight g4 actually forces the bishop to move. So we see bishop g5 from de Firmian. Tate attacks it with h6, bishop h4, and of course, lashing out again, g5, forcing that bishop back to g3. Emory then brings his bishop onto that newly opened dark square diagonal with the move bishop to g7. We see h3 kicking the knight comes back into e5. We then see a bishop to e2, knight b to c6, pretty standard developing ideas with these minor pieces here, and then knight back to b3. So far, this has been pretty normal chess, getting all of the pieces developed, nothing really exciting yet. However, here we see Tate play h5, making his aggressive intentions clear. Now, some of you may be wondering, why can white not just take this pawn? I mean, de Firmian has a bishop and a queen staring down this pawn. Has Tate just missed that? Obviously not. He's an international master and better at chess than you or I will probably ever be. However, if the bishop took this pawn here, we'd see the move g4 from Tate, which doesn't look like a good move. I mean, the queen, the pawn, and the bishop could take this. However, this rook pins the pawn to the rook on h1, such that if a move like bishop takes was played, then knight takes. Obviously, you're not going to play queen takes because the bishop's going to take your queen. And if you play pawn takes, well, then check. It's even worse. You've lost a full rook. The king's going to have to move up. You'll lose a queen as well. It's not going to be good. So instead of that, de Firmian plays the move f3, preparing for his bishop to drop back into that nice f2 to a7 diagonal here. As you'd expect, we see h4 and then bishop f2, kicking the bishop back onto the diagonal and claiming this space here for Tate. However, it's in this position that I want you guys to take a moment, pause, and actually look at the position. Let's more specifically look at the pawns in the position, because here we can actually kind of see where Tate's plan is about to come together from. While f3 was a nice move to allow the bishop to drop back to f2, it also has its perhaps undesirable consequences. De Firmian has now created an entirely light-squared pawn complex on his king side. Now, this isn't immediately and objectively a problem. However, it means that the dark squares are very, very weak, and Tate already controls two of them beautifully with these pawns here. So keep this idea in mind as Tate drops his knight back to g6 and we see kingside castles. To give credit to De Firmian, castles is one of the top engine moves in the position. However, Tate pounces on this conceptual weakness and plays the move bishop to e5. This makes a strong claim immediately to those weaker dark squares around the king, and you see how these dark squares are going to get exploited, and just trust me, the way it happens is beautiful. However, first we see queen to d2, and instead of carrying on with this dark square attack, for the moment, Tate plays a brilliant, subtle little move, queen to c8. This sets up a battery towards the h3 pawn here, which is only held by the g2 pawn, and perhaps there could be a bishop sacrifice after bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen takes that really opens up that king. With these pawns already here, the knight, the bishop coming in, the pressure is looking immense. De Firmian plays bishop to e3, pressuring that pawn on g5, and here we see bishop to f4 from Tate, pinning the bishop to the queen and forcing off the eventual trade of the dark square bishops. Rook f to e1 here, and then knight c to e5, bringing this knight in towards the king, towards those dark squares. It's all building. Knight to d4 here, and Tate plays the excellent bishop takes h3, deciding that now is the time to sacrifice the pawn. And I mean, you can sort of see why. Look at his minor pieces now. They are right around the king. They are applying all sorts of pressure. These pawns and this rook are going to apply pressure, and the queen can slide in on her diagonal after pawn takes and queen takes. Here we see something known as a Zwischenzug, which means a between move in German. Bishop b5, a little check here, kind of ignoring all the stuff going on here, giving the king a check, because realistically, you don't want to block here, because after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, there's going to be a fork here with the king and rook. And so Tate just plays king f8, calmly stepping across here and saying, you have no pressure on my king. I don't want a castle. I want this rook left on the h-file, applying the pressure up towards my opponent's king, who is far weaker. It's at this point that we see the trade of the dark square bishops. Bishop takes f4 and knight takes f4, and just look at the knights. Remember what I said earlier about the weaknesses and the dark squares, and just look at how these knights are situated, applying all sorts of pressure to around the black king. I mean, all of these light squares here are attacked. The knights are sitting basically unassailable on the dark squares. I mean, already this queen's in, the pawns are coming up. It's just beautiful. However, I guarantee that you will not be able to appreciate just how well these knights are positioned until you see how this game plays out. The most obvious threat in this position is knight takes f3 check, and after knight takes, queen takes, they've lost this pawn. There is still this knight here. The pawns can roll forward, and you know, this is going to be a big problem. So De Firmian plays rook to f1, defending that threat. Rook f1 here was actually the mistake that led to De Firmian's eventual demise. I mean, can you blame him for trying to defend this? Let me show you the Stockfish line. Stockfish, instead of rook f1, wanted knight to d5. And after knight takes f3, knight takes f3, queen g3 check, forcing the king across to then take the knight with check, king h2. I mean, can you blame De Firmian for not allowing this position? The main issue with rook f1 is that it does little to deter all the pressure coming down this side of the board, and it also blocks the f1 square as a potential escape for the king. I mean, from here though, you won't believe the move Tate plays next. He just switches his attention to the other side of the board entirely and just plays a6, kicks the bishop. The bishop moves back, and then he plays queen g3 check. There are two legal moves in this position. Surprisingly enough, De Firmian does not blunder mate in one by playing queen g2, and instead plays king to h1. And here is where Emory Tate plays the best move of the game, in my opinion. It is the only move that maintains advantage, and it is the move h3. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, well, that's a pretty obvious move. I mean, you want to open the h-file, you want to make claims to this square. I mean, why do you think that's such a good move? Why are you giving him this much credit? Well, after rook to g1, this is what Tate had to see, and this is what he did see, and this is what he played. queen g2 check. If the queen took the queen, then pawn takes would have been a double checkmate. One of them being with a pawn, one of them being with a rook, held by this beautiful knight here. That would be brutal. So instead, de Firmian plays rook takes queen, the obvious move. I mean, Tate has sacrificed his queen. However, after pawn takes rook, the only legal move is king g1, then rook h1. Coming in here, the only legal move again is king f2, and he picks up that rook on a1. Now, winning this rook over here wasn't even the exciting part of that combination. It is the fact that now this knight holds this pawn that threatens promotion to queen with checkmate on the white king. So de Firmian plays knight back to d1, intercepting the rook's control of the g1 square, such that if promotion was to happen, then the king could take. This is another beautiful little move. Instead of thinking about this rook on a1 or taking this pawn yet, Tate just plays king to g7, recognizing that this rook needs to be active. I mean, these pieces are beautifully active, and he wants to slide that across to the h-file. So he just moves the king up. Here, de Firmian carries on, desperately trying to defend, and drops the knight back to e2, trying to defend this promotion square and get it under that square. Tate goes rook to c8, b3, f6, and then knight to g1, stopping that promotion square. The rook slides over to h8, and this position is just beautiful. Tate's rook is on the h-file. Tate's rook is somehow on the first rank, and de Firmian's had to retreat both of his knights back to defend the promotion threats. Meanwhile, Tate's knights are doing spectacular things. I mean, just look at the dark squares. As I said at the start, look at the pressure exerted on f3. There are potential checks in the position. I mean, the pawn is held by this beautiful knight. What more can you ask from these four pieces? Bishop to c4, rook to h1, going in there. Tate brings the rook, threatening rook takes, king takes, and then knight takes here, forking the king and queen. De Firmian can't allow that, so bishop e2, defending the f3 square. Here Tate just picks up this pawn on a2, knight to e3 now, rook back to a1, and the knight just steps back to d1. De Firmian has nothing to do but wait, hopelessly oscillating like some depressed Newton cradle. And here, Tate takes his knight and drops it back to the g6 square. He needs to try a different angle. He needs to go in via h4, and that's fine. He's got plenty of time to do so, because these pieces can't move. They're all too tied together. The rooks are exerting insane pressure. And after we see the move bishop c4 again, knight to h4, and look at the position. I mean, look at the rooks here. Tate has literally put his rooks where the white rooks are supposed to be at the start of the game. De Firmian drops the bishop back to e2, defending the square again, but it's hopeless. We see the inevitable has arrived. The knights are well situated, and we see rook takes knight. After king accepts that sacrifice, knight to h4 check. And it was in this position, under the ruthless onslaught of Tate's knights, that de Firmian just resigned. The reason being that the only move he could have played was king to h2, promotion to a queen finally, just ignoring this rook. I mean, it's locked out, no one cares, we're working with the knights now. King takes knight, and then queen g2 would have been checkmate. I'm very happy that de Firmian resigned here, because it lets me leave this position on the board with the two knights next to each other, bullying the king as I outro this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, leave a comment. If you're new, I'd really appreciate a subscribe. I'm really enjoying covering these Emory Tate games. I mean, he was a ridiculous player, and yeah, my videos on Emory Tate seem to be doing really well, so I'm going to keep making them as long as you guys are enjoying them. But yeah, let me know how you found that. Just look at the knights, and I'll leave you on that. Goodbye.